which is the alleyway alongside that connects Blackboy Road and Old Tiverton Road. It shows the windows facing towards the site. You can just see that the side of the pub, which is a yellowish building in the middle of the picture. The property above with the flat roof dormer is the rug shop, so that shows the windows looking towards that particular site. This is the ground floor of the proposed development. It indicates the orange colour, the retail unit. It also shows the existing pub is going to be proposed to be a reception area for the student accommodation. The rear is laid out for student accommodation, and that extends, and you'll see some further elevations and floor plans later on. The building is set off the boundary at the rear in most instances and allows some communal space at the rear of the site. Again, this is further student accommodation on the first floor, and it's repeated on the second floor, and then the third floor is showing some fourth floor accommodation, which is basically above the retail unit. You'll see that the building has been set off on the left-hand side. It's set away from the building on Blackboy Road, and that's done to really reduce the impact it has on that particular neighbouring property. This is a street scene elevation showing the context of the site. The laundrette building is on the right-hand side, and the rug shop is on the left-hand side, and you'll see it's a very distinctive 3 units have now been proposed. You'll see that where the pub is, the Surrey Head pub, there's a dotted line there that shows the stepping up of the building. It's previously, it drops down, you might have noticed it on the photograph, and they're running through the ridge of that roof now to make it all appear as one. So that will be a complete new roof in that instance. As I say, the 4th story element is shown above the retail unit with the small dormers at the top. This shows the context of the site from seen from the rear from Old Tiverton Road. It's been designed to minimise the overlooking of neighbours in Old Tiverton Road, and the building has been reduced from its original submission of 4 stories to 3 stories, and it's a flat roof design just to further minimise that impact on that neighbouring property. Rear elevation in more detail. Some sections through the site. Of particular interest to note is the actual the top elevation section shows that the pub is not just the front section of the pitch for the pub is to be retained. It actually goes to the back, so it's a pitch that goes up and down as well. On a previous plan, a flat roof was coming off that particular ridge, and that was removed because it just destroyed the integrity of the pub too much. Okay, so there's a photo montage of how it would appear in the street scene from Blackboy Road. So just going on to the summary, the report sets out the principle of the site for retail is acceptable in policy terms. The building is located in the local district centre, and that's designated in the local plan. The student accommodation is also deemed appropriate in this location. Overall, the scheme's intention is to redevelop the site and repair the streets in this location, which is to be positively welcomed. The key issues are, the report goes in more detail, but essentially the key issues are the impact of the building on the residential amenities, particularly in Old Tiverton Road and Blackboy Road, and the impact on the street scene in the Belmont Conservation Area. In terms of the first point, the application has been through several revisions since its original submission to receive this officer recommendation of approval. The building has been reduced in height to the rear and has been set back into the site away from the boundary to further reduce its impact on neighbouring properties. A local resident has raised concern, and they'll be speaking later on about the shadowing of the new building, and they've done their own analysis in terms of what impact it has on the rear garden. And to that end, there is some discrepancies in terms of the architect's plans and the local residents' plans. However, there are slight differences there. But even taking into account the neighbour's own plan, the relationship is still considered acceptable in terms of the relationship of the rear of the building to their rear garden. The combination of obscure glazed windows, repositioning of the site has resulted in an appropriate configuration for this particular building, so it's acceptable in terms of its impact on the neighbouring properties. A previous scheme showed the existing pub to be demolished. Given it is identified as a positive building within the conservation area, this was considered unacceptable and revisions were made. Although it's only the main building, the main Surrey Head building is being retained and the rear elements are being removed. However, it is considered that this constitutes the main heritage asset in this particular location, and therefore is to be welcomed. An additional benefit is that it establishes a design approach for this particular row. You'll see, and I mentioned earlier, it's 3 very distinct units, and that really is sort of picked up in terms of like the historic fabric, in terms of like how it evolves over time anyway. So I think that is the appropriate way of dealing with it. And consequently, the resultant combination of a retained building and a new build will, it is considered, enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area, which has been for too long tired and neglected. Development is therefore considered acceptable, and the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Paul. Does anybody have any points of clarification? Is that clarification, Councillor Branston?
Well, yes, if I may, Chair. I'm just looking at this for the first time, which is additional information, and this relates to condition 7. And what I want to try and understand is that mandatory, and if so, have we had a report on that?
In terms of the condition, it was originally a little bit loosely worded, and I'll make no apologies for that. That was my fault, but it was actually looked at by the Heritage Officer. And what we're keen on doing is to making sure that the internal fabric of the building is retained as much as possible. So the condition was worded as though you could actually go and gut it. And obviously, looking at that, that's not the intention, that's not what we want to see done. The applicants, I understand, are happy to deal with, to accommodate that condition, so it therefore needs a proper report to go and see what's there, see what needs to be retained. They've accepted that the actual footprint, the layout of the building is fine and works for them in terms of the student reception, so that is something that would be adhered to, and we would insist on that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, well, could you just clarify for me on that montage you've got there, on the bottom one, so the pub is going to remain as it is, with the roof line as it is, and the eave line as it is? No.
Not quite. The actual roof, the roof is, at the moment it's stepped. You can see the top plan is actually dropped. So what they intend to do is, there's 2 reasons for it. One is to actually run the ridge through, which is, in visual terms, is reasonable. Because it will need a new roof, the roof is shot, so it needs replacing anyway. So the re-roof that with natural slate has been put in terms of condition. And also what that helps to do is actually reduce that kind of relationship between the 4-storey and the 3-storey. So because that runs through higher, it doesn't appear as severe in terms of a change in levels, if that makes sense. So it isn't as existing, but I think it's a good compromise in terms of trying to meet those aspirations.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask whether the architects behind this came up with any alternative facing designs other than this sort of office block design, which does seem slightly incongruous in relation to the rather attractive other period features in the road? It just seemed to stick out a bit like an office block.
I think in terms of like the materials and the finish, and I have raised this with the architects, we have a condition on regarding materials, and I think that that scheme probably would benefit from the actual, where it's got the rendered element. If that was brickwork, I think it would actually incorporate into the street scene a lot better. So one of the things that I looked at in terms of that approach was the fact that the render looks a little bit stark, and I think that certainly my eye gets drawn to that. And I think if that was like a brickwork, which could be a different brickwork, and I think in terms of like having that separation is the right thing to do. So that's the approach the architects came up with. I think it is in principle the right thing to do. I think in terms of detail regarding the actual materials, I think that's something that could be addressed within the conditions that we've attached.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I'd like to ask Councillor Vizard if he would come to the table, please. And when you're ready, Councillor Vizard.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Firstly, it's important to say that local residents accept that this site will and should be developed. But it is disappointing to see yet another proposal from a developer for student housing on a site that would have been ideally suited to more sensitively designed and much needed affordable local housing that would make a far greater contribution to the local character of this area. It is one of the inherent problems with this application that, notwithstanding the reduction in the number of bed spaces from 88 to 72, which is hardly a game changer. It instead seeks to pack as many student rooms into a modern development in an existing conservation area, compromising the precious heritage offered by the Surrey Head pub and squeezed into an area of land between existing retail, residential buildings and buildings of cultural and heritage significance such as Moose Hall and the nearby St Anne's Chapel. And actually walking up there this evening, I looked from the Sidwell Street aspect, and I'm very concerned indeed about the impact of this building on that aspect from the viewing for St Anne's Chapel at the end of the road as it forks between Old Tiverton Road and Black Boy and Sidwell Street, that this will have an impact on the setting of that very important and historic 15th century building. I don't need to remind councillors that the council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing supply, and that while quite rightly members must consider this application on its own merits, this development would be detrimental to this part of the city, to local residents' amenity, their outlook, light and quality of life. I do welcome Urban-Centric's revisions to their application and thank Paul Jeffrey for his work with the developer to make some adjustments to the height, though I think this is insufficient and in terms of the roof design, insensitive and incongruous, as has been mentioned, to existing buildings in the area. I also welcome the decision to retain at least the frontage of the Surrey Head pub, which is acknowledged by the City Council's Heritage Officer as making a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the Belmont Conservation Area. However, the Heritage Officer still expresses concerns about the amount of new build here and questions whether the present structure is sufficient to accommodate this without having to be rebuilt and in effect resulting in the near demolition of this building. Members, please consider whether the retention of the facade of the Surrey Head is little more than the frontage to veil what is a deeply unsympathetic development. Please judge this book by its contents, not just its cover. As a local planning authority, we need to use our heads rather than end up sorry. I draw to your attention Devon County Council's Highways concerns about the provision of space on the public highway for drop-off and loading and the impact on vehicle access to these bays. The suggested solution to this problem removes a parking space which may help to alleviate some of the challenges for future occupants of this sizable development, but adds further pressure to already overstretched local parking. Once again, local residents have to pay a price for the convenience of a development which, while car-free, will only add more student drivers to an already congested area. Some will come with cars and will therefore have to find places to park in the vicinity. I accept that Black Boy Road already has its share of purpose-built student accommodation, but rather than this being an argument for allowing more of this based upon precedent, the counter-argument about oversaturation should be considered. Black Boy Road, Mount Pleasant and surrounding roads in Elmside are already heavily student areas with a very high volume of HMOs. The vast majority of city centre residents accept that they will be living in areas with many students. Indeed, they see value in this, but they are right to expect that this is balanced. A further 72 bed sits can only tip this balance further. Most students are well behaved and respectful to neighbours and communities, but inevitably an increase in the volume of this young and transient population adds to issues of noise, disturbance and antisocial behaviour, already a significant challenge. This area is already exposed to unacceptable levels of drug issues and antisocial behaviour. I'm not suggesting students will necessarily add to this, but I do think issues of noise disturbance, particularly late at night, would be exacerbated. This building and its proximity to adjacent dwellings and shops suggests that fire safety should be a consideration. So I ask why no consultation or representation from Devon and Somerset Fire Service has been provided. This, I would suggest, is reason enough for a deferral tonight at least. Turning to the loss of outlook for nearby residents, I know Mr. Summers will be bringing to your attention the deficiencies in the applicant's shadow analysis, suggesting that the gardens of Old Tiverton Road would not be unduly impacted. On the contrary, the proposed building looms large on these people's homes and gardens. It is overbearing and runs contrary to guidance in Exeter City Council's residential design guide. To remind you, this states that development should be designed to allow residents to feel at ease in their homes and gardens and able to enjoy good quality outlook without adjacent buildings being overbearing. Instead, this development would dominate this neighbourhood, and at a time when health and well-being and the importance of balancing the way people live with economic growth are being highlighted as so vital, this claustrophobic development would have a detrimental impact. Residents on Blackboy Road would find a significant increase in bedroom windows facing towards them. The distances proposed between the new structures and the existing flats on Blackboy Road are between 12 and 17 metres. The council's residential design SPD requires 22 metres. Yet another compromise. Just because this is not suburbia does not mean that people's living arrangements are less important. Where people choose or need to live in a city centre, this comes with compromise and different expectations. Yes, but that does not mean we shouldn't try to enhance this living experience rather than dismiss it as being, well, that's city centre living. I like to think we're moving beyond that, and this council in particular. Would we accept a similar cheek-by-jowl development outside the city centre, I'd ask. The planning report states that the outlook of the residents on Old Tiverton Road will significantly change as a result of a large and more dominant structure rather than the relatively low-lying buildings which currently exists. And yet it reaches the conclusion that you should approve tonight. I ask you to interrogate as to why it reaches that conclusion, given it makes that point. And this is an important point. Why make this situation worse, as I believe this development would? Why not try to improve this area? This development would overshadow gardens and significantly diminish light and outlook. This council has plans for developing key areas of Exeter City Centre as a garden city, paying real respect, balance, green space outlook and healthy living. The council's approach is surely the right one. This development is the wrong one. It is regressive and anachronistic, a 20th century cram them in policy towards development when we need a far more progressive and balanced, high quality, holistic approach. I appreciate the compromise the developer has made, but let's not forget the compromise on quality of life, local heritage, visual amenity and outlook, design and guidance on distance that the scale, height and footprint of this development would still mean for this area and its residents. For the reasons I hope I've demonstrated, this is not the right development for this site. I would urge you to consider it very carefully and to reject it tonight. You need to weigh up the application and make a balanced judgment. But you can also send a strong signal this evening that this council, as demonstrated by its own first-class council home building policy and Exeter City Living's high-quality, standard-bearing approach, wants better and more sensitive development in our city. Development that balances economic growth with the environment, quality of life, people's living space, and their health and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vizard. Has anybody got any points of clarification to Councillor Vizard? No? Thank you, Councillor Vizard. We now have Mr Summers coming to speak. Unfortunately, Mr Summers, unlike Councillor Vizard, you only have 3 minutes to state your case when you're comfortable.
Thank you. I've got some pictures which hopefully are coming around. There were 8 properties on Old Tiverton Road that back onto the site, and I live in one of them. And the issue for the residents of these properties is the effect of the proposed building on our outlook. And so I want to briefly discuss the change in outlook as a result of the proposed development. So if you look at picture 1, that's a view down my garden. These properties have got quite short gardens. My garden's about 10 metres long. At the end of the garden there's a back alley, and beyond that there's the existing garage. And I've sketched in a red line which is the proposed development, which is significantly higher and also closer into our property. Picture 2 is just the same story really, with a profile along the centre of my garden with my house on the left and the existing garage in orange on the right, and you can see the proposed building, the roof lines quite a lot higher and further in towards my building. And so looking from end of my garden, it basically looks about twice as high, the proposed development, as what's there at the moment. I also want to say something about the effect on the light in the gardens. So if you turn over, you've got picture 3, which is my kitchen last Friday with the sun streaming through the window. So the gardens face southeast and they get sun in the mornings. So in the last week I've been introduced to the delights of shadow analysis, So I did a shadow analysis for what's going on last Friday, which you can see picture 4. Again, my house on the left with kitchen window and the existing garage in orange on the right. And you can see the light grey shadow, the existing shadow misses my window, and so I'm getting lots of nice sunlight. And so I considered the effect of the proposed building, and unfortunately I lose all my sunlight in my kitchen. Picture 5 is the same story in a more general way. So it's looking at 1st of April in the spring and also in September in the autumn. And I've picked a time when the sun shines exactly down my garden, which is about 10:30 in the morning. And the light green is my garden in sun and the dark green is my garden in shadow. And you can see...
Sorry, but your 3 minutes is up, Mr. Summer.
I just got to the end, I think.
Does anybody have any questions, Mr. Summer? Councillor Branston.
I was fascinated by this because although I've not been on the planning committee for very long, I've never seen so much detailed work, this kind of work done. And I just wondered if you've got any experience or any professional ability to produce something like this.
Thank you. Well, I was a research scientist for 40 years. I was a physicist and a mathematician, so I think I can do the sums. You may have noticed in one of my objection letters I queried whether all the heights were level on the plan, or were correct on the plans, and it transpired there was actually an error in the plans which I've identified. So I think I know what I'm doing. As the planning officer mentioned, there appears to be a discrepancy between my picture 5 shadow analysis and the architect shadow analysis, which I puzzled over. But as far as I can see, it's because I'd used British Summertime and the architect used GMT, and so the shadows are longer in my picture.
Thank you, Mr. Summer. Has anybody else got any questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Summer. Thank you. If you could switch the microphone off, that would help. Could you switch your microphone off, please,
I
Councillor
can
Branston?
indeed.
Thank you. Right, members, we'll open this one for debate now. Who wants to start? Councillor Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm well known on this committee for criticising design and whatever, but this, I must admit, is pleasing to the eye for design. And I think it's the first time I can say that because the end of Blackboy Road, this end of Blackboy Road has been quite tired for some time. And I think that is quite a difference. The design is I don't agree with what Councillor Mitchell had said just about the red brick, because I think it lifts that end. But this is a part of the city which is used day in, day out for people entering in and out the citizens. What does concern me is the fact of if we can bring up another one that's showing it the amenity area. The lack of what I would call, if you've got all that in the people who are wanting to go into that amenity area, is if they are quite, young people are, we've always young and we all like to have a pint or whatever in our time. Whatever we drink now might be quite different, but the noise of people surrounding on the residential area, and particularly on Old Tiverton Road, and I did hear what the gentleman said just now, Mr. Summers. I must say that I feel it will lift the end of Blackboy Road to such an extent it might pull the other end up to make them feel that they might sort of not increase their frontage, but to look at what they've got and allowed it to get tired on the other end of Blackpool Road. And I do think sometimes it just needs something different. And I feel if this wasn't student design, that would look marvellous. And I take Councillor Vizard's comment that it would be wonderful if indeed we would have one or two bedroom flats there for the young people for Exeter. But it's not. The design is there, and I think I will be supporting this.
Right, who wants to speak next? Councillor Morse.
I have to disagree with everything that Councillor Henson just said, I think, which is unusual because actually we do tend to agree strangely on planning, if not much else politically. I don't have an issue with it being student accommodation. I'd love to see something different, but I don't have an issue with the student accommodation matter. What I'm more concerned about is the appearance and the scaling of the buildings. So I can understand the argument for the improving of the facade, although I think it's okay looking at the front of it. I have the same concern that looking from the bottom at the roundabout that way up, that it's going to be quite large and overwhelming for those buildings that lead down to the chapel. And I have recently, and I feel I should have learned this before, learnt the difference between view and outlook. And one of the descriptions in why outlook is a planning matter and view isn't, is to do with the oppressive nature of buildings. And I have to say, if I lived on Old Tiverton Road, I think I'd find the proposal quite oppressive in my back garden. So my concern is, I suppose, the reason I don't feel I can vote for it is not because it's student accommodation, although I'd love to see flats there. I do just feel like we may be overdeveloping and squeezing a lot into the site, and then to the positive impact on the front, there's a detrimental effect on the back for those people in their residential sort of amenity and their outlook. And it doesn't quite sit right. And I think the first application was so poor that this one started to look good, but I think that there's potential for it to be better and maybe not so oppressive, but I'm sure there's something to do with whether that's affordable and it creates enough of a profit. But for me, it's so close to being all right, but it's just not quite there, and I don't think I can vote for it at the moment in its current state.
Councillor Bialik.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A couple of points that Councillor Vizard made, which I would like to have satisfied for myself, was one about the fire service and about any remarks back from them. And this sort of adjoins myself to what Councillor Morse was saying about the back. I mean, they're not big gardens, that's just the way it is. And yes, I would accept the view isn't that great at the moment, and it could be improved. But querying what Councillor Vizard said about the 17 metres is it versus 22 metres as opposed to the standard, and that would have a significant bearing. And also looking at the paper that we got, and whether or not the proposed building, and nothing to tell me that this would look wrong, to the rear, does it need to be so high to the rear? And would that go some way in sort of, I wouldn't say appeasing, but going to satisfy the the people around the back and about the sunlight? And that may have a bit of, may just help a little bit. So the scaling matching to the rear as opposed to the front, and these are my concerns. Totally also check whether or not these were lovely flats for people, and we all say, oh, let's have social housing. And yeah, but if it was social housing, it would still be a high building, it would still be oppressive, so it's not about who lives in it, it's about the building itself. So we're going to do something about the height to the rear, in my view, the fire service and the distance, and I don't know whether or not, I'm leaning towards Councillor Vizard's suggestion that perhaps we may need to defer to resolve some of these things and perhaps just get a better thing, but there's other people yet to speak.
Paul, would you like to respond to the fire officers?
There is no fire safety officers report in relation to this application. We would have to satisfy building regulations, and that's the normal course of events in terms of like deeming this building. If it didn't pass building regulations, it wouldn't get approved. So we tend to defer to the building regs in this particular instance. But yes, it is possible to clearly get a comment from the fire service if members felt that was necessary. Distances, I think in terms of like, there are distances that are quite close, and I think the report identifies between the ones that are to the rear. You probably saw the photographs regarding the ones in the laundrette, and they are quite close. They're the ones that talk about the 12 and 17 metres. I think the report tries to kind of differentiate between that one, which are existing window to windows, because there are existing properties there with like windows facing towards the flats at the back of the laundrette. In terms of the relationship between the windows to the rear of the existing block and Old Tiverton Road, many of those windows, in fact all of them, are either obscurely glazed or to a side window, so they're not main principal windows. And I think that's, although the building is the building in terms of a height, in terms of the windows that face onto that, the back of that property towards Old Tiverton Road, have been designed to like not be main bedroom windows. So I think in that respect, they are acceptable distances, and I think in some instances they're 18 metres, 22 metres and beyond. Because they're not bedroom windows, then it's not so critical. The other one, the lesser element, is because there are existing windows there. And I think, as Councillor Vizard mentioned, in terms of the urban setting, the existing building is a material consideration, and therefore we have to take account of that. So there's no way, I certainly can't say this isn't a tight site with quite a lot of development on it. Clearly we're always looking for the most efficient use of the land, and clearly there is a balance that has to be taken. The officer's recommendation is imbalance is acceptable, but the points members are making are valid in terms of like the concerns that they've got about impact on residential amenity.
Councillor Fold.
Thank you, Chair. I think in the current climate, a consideration of student accommodation has to be made. Like many of us, I was quite proud to read in the Express and Echo before Christmas that apparently we haven't given permission for any student accommodation throughout 2019. So if we're going to create a precedent for that in 2020, I think I'd agree with Councillor Morse that it could be so much better. I've listened to Councillor Vizard talking about the street scene, how incongruous the new buildings might be seen to be, about Councillor Violet referring to the rear of the buildings, about Mr. Summers talking about the loss of light, and I would formally propose that there be a deferral to consider the impact on this site of those things: street scene, loss of light, and the rear.
Do you have a seconder for your proposal, Councillor Fold?
I would second that.
Can it be made quite clear on what we are deciding, if it is going to be a vote on this, what we are actually referring it for?
I think it's for the reasons that I gave Councillor Henson, propose a deferral to consider the impact of an incongruous street scene, a loss of light, and the appearance from the rear of the development.
Could we put amenities space in it, please? And I would accept that.
So what we're saying is we would like a deferral because we don't like the rear elevations and the rear amenity space and the lack of a report from the fire officer.
And loss of light.
And loss of light.
Mayor, correct, Chair, it mentions that we still haven't had the secure cycle parking. We're going to defer it, get that sorted at the same time, rather than us approve it and then officers have to approve that later on.
Right, have you all got that one?
Apart from that's fine.
Right, those in favour that we defer this item, please show. Right, thank you. We will defer this item until the next meeting, hopefully. Thank you. Thank you, members. We will now go on to the land of Pulling Road, Pinhoe. And again, it's Paul to present this one.
Thank you, Chair. This application proposes 40 dwellings on an existing field to the north of existing properties in Bourne Rise and in Pulling Road. Proposed access is off Pulling Road through the demolition of an existing garage, which I'll show you on a photograph later on. In fact, I'll show you now. The actual garage to be removed is the one on the right-hand side, and access the garage on the left-hand side would be retained. There's a few photographs here just show kind of indication of what the site's about. This is looking from the north of the site, looking across, right in the corner where you see just a bit of rendered on those houses. That's where the proposed access is proposed to be. You can see it's a sloping site. It's slightly raised. There's looking across, and that's looking towards again Bourne Rise and Pulling Road. That's looking certainly towards Bourne Rise across the site from the north, looking southwards. The access would be in the sort of central part of the site and to the right-hand side. Again, this is looking from where the access would come in, and this is the western boundary towards the site. This is Bourne Rise again, just the same thing really, photographs that show the actual extent of the site. This is the emergency access which you'll see on the location plan, which is situated to the north of the site, and the openness next to the existing properties there. So the layout of the site. Access shown at the bottom from Pulling Road, and a fairly sort of standard layout in terms of how it's set out. A mixture of semi-detached and detached properties. Again, I'll just show you a few. I'll flick through these. There's just a few pictures of the designs of the properties. It's a very much contemporary approach, and as you'll understand later, and I think the speaker will talk about, is some of the design has been led by the fact that it's a zero carbon dwellings, so they'll talk about that in more detail. But this is just an idea of the properties, unashamedly contemporary in their approach and their materials. As you see here, this is a few photo montages that sort of give a flavour of what the development could look like. There's a garage being removed, the access coming in. There's looking to the site. The development is on the left-hand side there. That's just about to cross the culvert into the site. That's within the site. The road sweeps round. That's the main spine road that runs through the site. And again, properties on either side with parking at the front. Again, that's looking down the spine road from the top of the site. Again, very contemporary design that's been proposed. And that's looking from the corner of the site. That's looking down the axis is right in the middle on the right-hand side, if you understand that. And this is just an aerial photograph of the site itself. The properties at the bottom are Bourne Rise. The access is in the bottom right-hand corner, as you see it on that plan. Okay. The report provides some detail about the policy position in respect of this application, which lies within an area of landscape setting. Recent appeals have highlighted the need for the council to be very specific when refusing applications in landscape setting, as the policy is considered out of date and carries less weight than the positive benefit of providing additional housing to meet the council's lack of a 5-year housing supply. Whilst it is still possible to refuse an application in areas of landscape setting, and as will be discussed later when we look at the application for Pennsylvania Road, it's the assessment of the quality of the landscape and what it adds to the character of the area that it becomes more demanding. In this location, the site lies between Pinhoe Quarry and Home Farm, both of which are currently being developed. Your officer's recommendation is therefore that to resist this application on landscape grounds would be difficult to sustain, and therefore, in principle, the scheme is considered acceptable for housing. Since the submissions, discussions have been ongoing in respect of the access arrangement and layout to achieve an acceptable scheme. It has been concluded that the layout and design of the houses are appropriate in this location and the zero carbon design is particularly welcome. Detailed access arrangements have been discussed with the highway officer who is here tonight and considered acceptable subject to financial contribution towards improvement in the Pinhoe area, which I'm sure Lloyd will explain if members wish to hear that. Members, however, will note that the scheme seeks to achieve 15% of provision of affordable housing on the site, which is below the policy requirement of 35%. This figure was reached following a viability assessment which factored in the highway contribution, the educational contribution, and most significantly the additional costs from building zero carbon homes. This viability report has been assessed by the Council's own viability expert and considered acceptable. The officer's recommendation is therefore based on the premium of providing zero carbon homes above the provision of affordable housing. However, with the positive benefit of the fact that this development will provide 40 additional homes, which will help to meet the Council's lack of a 5-year housing supply. Consequently, the officer's recommendation is approval. There's a lot more detail that's been put in the report, but that really gives you the fundamentals in terms of this particular application. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Has anybody got any questions of clarification to the officer? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I note on the additional information sheet, clause number 13, footpath linking site to Pinhoe Quarry, been provided to the site boundary. Now, I quite understand that we can't make any other developer make a path, but am I correct in thinking that this developer will develop a path to his site boundary or her site boundary, which could well be then blocked up by the Pinhoe Quarry developer, or that is the correct case?
Yes, it could be. I mean,
because you can't make that developer do something because they already have.
I think it's common practice where a developer wouldn't want to be held to ransom if an adjacent developer wasn't wanting to play ball. So all the developer can do, and all we can ask them to do, is build the path up to the boundary with the intention that that will be opened up at a later date.
So it's seriously possible that that path may not be of any use at all
It is.
until such time as the Pinhoe Quarry developer finishes their part.
Agreed.
Did you have a question, Councillor Bialik?
I do. A couple, actually, Chair.
It may be for Lloyd to answer. I'm just looking on page 38, the summary about the traffic, because at the moment I'm just concerned about the traffic and waiting to listen to the other things. I want to get it straight in my head.
Okay.
Page 38.
You go to page number
I've got
You're not online.
I've got a permanent display model. Okay, well, it's travel. It's got on-site facilities, travel planning, construction, and summary. Could be.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the one.
Where we talk about the contributions to Devon County Council to provide suitable infrastructure. Can you give us a clue on what that looks like? The impacts of the development can be mitigated. How do you see those being mitigated? And then, subject to those conditions being attached, the granting of any permission, you would raise no objection. I do have a concern, and perhaps you can help me here. I saw the picture, how it's going to be one way started. I've been taken up there, and I've shown this. It's quite a congested area, I think it all looks good. I've got something else that's be for them in a minute. So I am concerned about the impact that the 40 homes would, and awfully nice cars there, whether they come with them, I don't know, to it. So that's one thing for you, Lloyd. And then maybe for Paul, it's about the affordable housing. I'm not sure we've got a policy yet of saying that should a developer wish to bring forward carbon neutral homes, which we support, therefore we will subsidise it by taking less affordable housing. I don't know if that's the direction we're going, if you see the point I'm making. So, you know, because they won't badge it as that this is being supported by Exeter City Council. Only 6 out of 40. I feel uncomfortable with that deal, to be perfectly honest. So there's the highways, and then there's about the affordable housing contribution.
So the reason that we're asking for the contribution is based on exactly the same reason we asked for it for the Churchill development, which was approved by yourselves, by Exeter City Planning Committee, and also by East Devon Local Planning Committee, which was at Old Park Farm. At Old Park Farm, we asked for a highways contribution. East Devon District Council refused the application. It went to appeal, and the inspector approved the application based on traffic impacts, based on a financial contribution towards sustainable transport in the Pinhoe area. So subsequently to that, Devon County Council have produced a Pinhoe Area Access Area Strategy Addendum, which is a hyperlink, which is in my response, and I think Councillor Harvey's got a copy of it. Okay, so you'll see in there that Devon County can't no longer deliver the Exhibition Way Link Road, which was one of the key features of alleviating traffic in Pinhoe. So what we've tried to do is deliver more sustainable options. So to answer your question, we've been looking at providing E4 cycle routes, so you know about Summer Lane and the bridge over Summer Lane and getting a cycle link into the city centre. We've been looking at more pedestrian crossing facilities. We've been looking at Bliss Valley Trail. We've been looking at enhanced bus services along Pinhoe. So it's all those kinds of mitigation measures within the travel plan that we're looking to look at, along with the Langton Lane Link Road. So it's all those kind of measures that are outside of the red line of the developer that we would pull together, a pool of 106, together with other Pinhoe developments to make this acceptable.
Paul, do you want to answer the other half of this one?
In response to your question, the zero carbon goes above our policy requirements in terms of, so there is no, the policy is set lower in terms of like the actual energy efficiency homes that we would expect to see. So this goes over and above what we'd normally expect to see. So I think the reason for me, like flagging it up at the end, is exactly the reason you've said. Clearly there's a balance there in terms of like what we asked for in terms of trying to achieve energy efficient homes, and how that is balanced against affordable housing. When the application came in, there was no affordable housing whatsoever. So you could say there has been a gain there, but it might have just been a tactic in terms of the developer, and I'm not going to make any comments on that. But clearly it has been worked through, and it's quite right that the viability assessment has come through, but it's, as the report says, that there is a premium put on zero carbon homes, which is about £27,000 per dwelling. So that's the product that they've got, that's the product that the developers are promoting, and the actual developer will be talking about that particular product. So yeah, it's really a factor in terms of like the need for the highway contribution, the need for the premium on the affordable housing, on the zero carbon homes, the educational contribution as well, has all had a factor in terms of like reducing the affordable housing. And yeah, there is a policy that says 35% housing, which is they're not achieving, and that is the balance that you have to, in terms of making the decision, take on board. As officers, we've gone down one particular route. Clearly, it's them to make the decision at the end of the day.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Can I totally support what Councillor Bartlett was saying, because in fact there was a question I was going to ask before he spoke on this matter. My worry is that the principle that we're setting here in regard not just to this development, to future developments. If people are coming along to us and saying, yes, we're building to a higher standard than you require, therefore we demand to pay less. I can't imagine these houses are not going to be sold at a premium, being badged in whatever way by the developer as being zero carbon and built to the highest standards. And people would expect to pay a premium for that. And it worries me that if we establish this as a precedent on this particular site, we're going to get a situation where in future we're balancing zero carbon against low standards, meaning no money or some money. And I think that's a dangerous precedent.
If there are any other questions, sorry, Councillor Shum, did you have?
Can I clarify the answer that Councillor Bialik got? Because I was scribbling at the time. And so you're saying that if each extra affordable house would cost them £27,000, effectively, so another rate would be 202,000 roughly. Because it's 27,700. There's one confused. There's a figure in the report saying it's 27,700 extra per property to make them carbon neutral. I thought you were saying that each extra affordable house is going to cost 27,000. No, fine. Because the thing is, an affordable house isn't, oh, we're giving it away free. The housing association pays money for it. So the only giveaway is the difference between what they would pay and, should we say, the open market price. Have we got any indication of what that figure would be per property roughly?
100%, yes, that's all. Can you answer that one, Paul?
Sorry, no, I shook my head, sorry. No, I can't.
I couldn't see you, Chair. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question on the additional information that we were given, and it's about these parking spaces. In the original report it was 82 and it's now 99. Was that just an error by the developers?
No, it's an error by myself in terms of when the report was written. I did pick up on a previous design access statement which said 82, but the developer, obviously reading the report, has counted them in detail and actually come to a more accurate figure. So it was based on previous information that was given, but like the figure in the additional sheet is correct.
It does seem rather a lot though, 99 between 40 properties.
It is quite a lot in terms of as the report says, in terms of the additional report, each of those has got an electric charging point for electric cars, so it is something that is actually part of their package in terms of their overall product that's being promoted.
Would you mind, so it's more than 2 per property, so where are the rest going? So you've got, is it on-street parking? I mean, how are they structuring it?
Yeah, there's some visitors parkings as well, so like there is a combination of like garage parking, spaces on front of on the forecourt, and also on roads as well, so there is a combination of parking available.
We now have 2 speakers on this subject. First is an objector, Marie Radford, if you would like to come to the table, please. And when you're comfortable, if you'd like to turn the microphone on, press the button on the right. That's it. And when you're comfortable, you have 3 minutes.
Right. As a resident of Bourne Rise, I wish to object strongly to yet another housing development on land off Pulling Road, Pinhoe, Exeter. Due to the many other major housing developments in Pinhoe, Broadclist and Westclist, and a further proposed 400 new homes in the quarry at Harrington Lane, the Greenbelt land and wildlife corridor for numerous variety of wild birds, badgers, squirrels, foxes, etc., has already had a major detrimental impact. The infrastructure cannot take more traffic, more sewage, more light pollution and a larger population. With all the new recent developments, Pinhoe and the surrounding area already suffers from severe traffic congestion, particularly around commuter and school traffic periods. The present road and access infrastructure is just not adequate to support a further mass influx. The disappearance of our natural open countryside views are being lost forever to the detriment of all of us and for future generations. The addition of another development would put even more pressure on residential amenities such as schools, medical, surgery, library and public transport. The only vehicle access from the development of Pulling Road is inadequate and is too narrow. It would create further road safety dangers for existing residents, vehicles and pedestrians in the Pinhole area. Another development would further destroy the character of this rural area. It would have an adverse impact on protected trees, hedges, ground stability and drainage, loss of privacy, overshadowing and loss of light and highway safety. There is a stream running down into a culvert in Harrington Lane. The drain in the road already overflows, drenching pedestrians walking on the pavement, and I don't believe it can take any more water. The proposed implementation of heat pumps can cause noise pollution by constant humming, and sound does reverberate quite considerably in this area. Also, I think the design of the development does not fit in with the countryside at all, and I think, you know, it could stand out like a sore thumb in a very rural area. That's it.
Thank you. Are you happy to take any questions?
Yes.
Has anybody got any questions? Councillor Guzane.
Thank you for that. First of all, I'd like to ask you, you know that extra population is increasing. We have to build houses. Where do you suggest that we build the houses?
Yes, but well, I don't think that's a relevant question, Councillor Guzane. No. Yeah, no, okay. Sorry.
Yes, but there is overload in Pinhole and it's becoming a real problem.
Thank you, Ms. Radford. Thank you.
That's it, is it?
Yes, that's it for the moment, yes. You've had your 3 minutes, I'm afraid. We now have a supporter, Mr. Tom Carr. If he would like to come to the table, please. And you too have 3 minutes when you're comfortable, Mr. Carr.
Will I get set up? Is that all right?
Yes, make yourself comfortable first.
Hello everyone, how are we?
You need to press the button on the microphone.
Okay. The left or the right button?
Right.
Good evening everyone, my name is Tom Carr, one of the co-founders of Verto Homes. Ladies and gentlemen, 50 years ago, last July, the culmination of a decade of record-breaking investment, technological innovation, and a level of human cooperation never before witnessed in the history of mankind, enabled human beings to leave Earth's atmosphere, travel 250,000 miles through the vacuum of space, walk on a new world, and return home to Earth safely. The significance of NASA's Apollo achievement throughout the 1960s cannot be understated. Moreover, their achievement shows that when humanity sets itself a challenge, focuses its skills and resources, and works together toward a common goal, however ambitious that goal may be, anything is possible. Skip forward 50 years and the space race equivalent of our generation is much closer to home. In fact, the space race equivalent of our generation is protecting and safeguarding our only home. The difficulty and complexity in undertaking this new global challenge cannot be underrated. The end prize could not be greater, and the penalty for getting it wrong is incomprehensible. Given all we know now, why are we not taking this issue seriously? Every country, government, corporation, man, woman and child needs to work together now if we have the slightest chance of slowing down climate change and not leaving the world more barren than when each of us entered it. We at Verto Homes do not expect to change the entire world, but we are striving to influence and make radical changes within the sector in which we operate, the Southwest housing market. One of the company's key goals is to change the way people live by changing the very homes they live in. How? By building homes that enable our buyers to live in a more sustainable and environmentally friendly way. While people are finally waking up to how important it is to live in a more sustainable way, we are proud to have been doing this for almost a decade and have helped hundreds of residents across the Southwest to begin their journey towards a zero carbon lifestyle. Our zero carbon smart homes do not burn fossil fuels for light or heat. They do not emit any CO2 into the atmosphere. No gas boilers, no wood burners, just clean, renewable energy. If Verta Homes are permitted to build 40 zero-carbon smart homes at Pinho instead of national house builders developing traditional homes, Exeter will reduce its carbon emissions by a staggering 324 tonnes of CO2 annually in perpetuity. Exeter City has taken the lead by making a bold commitment to become carbon neutral by 2030, and Exeter is clearly leading local authorities around the country by recently publishing its blueprint for carbon neutral city. If Exeter is going to lead the way and achieve its goal of becoming carbon neutral, then supporting the delivery of a truly zero carbon housing development, such as our project at Pinho, is essential. And more of these innovations need to come forward.
3 minutes are up, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. We have to strict 3 minutes.
Give me 10 seconds.
No, sorry. Right. Has anybody got any questions, points of clarification? Councillor Shelton.
Yeah, you can probably guess this from what I was asking just now. Question, you're saying about how green you want to make this site, but even if you exclude visitor spaces, these houses have more than 2 parking spaces per property. I'd be much keener if you're encouraging people not to use cars. What we're saying is we're allowing 2 cars per property on 3 and 4 bed homes, which I'll be quite honest, leads me on to my next point. What is the difference in price received on an affordable home versus a full market price home?
So So in terms of the parking, obviously we can reduce the allocation of parking. That's not a problem. Previously, all of our developments come with electric vehicle charging points, and we urge our buyers to live sustainably by riding electric cars. So yes, we're giving more opportunity for car parking spaces. We're also promoting a sustainable way of transport, but again, that can be reduced. That was your first question. The second question was regards to the affordable housing. I'm not at liberty to answer that question myself. I could get someone to come up and answer that afterwards, but I don't want to get into numbers and technical detail.
Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Chair. Can you reassure Mrs. Radford, who made a point about the noise from heat pumps? Is that the case or not?
There is a slight hum you receive from heat pumps, of course, but obviously we have to adhere to certain noise levels and decibel levels, so they're not noisy homes, if that's what you're asking.
So can I sort of ask a question as well? Does this mean that you won't be able to hear the noise outside the house? I think this is what the lady was concerned about.
You won't.
She won't be able to hear the noise outside?
Not outside the house, no.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Listening with interest to the diatribe about making Exeter greener, and I wish to pick up on the point that Councillor Sheldon made. There is a bus service at the bottom of this road every 20 minutes. There is a bi-directional super cycle highway within 5 minutes bike ride of this. Given those green credentials, it would appear to me that this site is absolutely ripe for a car-free development. I'd be grateful if you'd explain why you didn't choose that option, please.
I believe having a car-free development would hinder sales. When people are spending money on their principal properties, they want to be able to store a car. No matter how much we can push people towards a zero-carbon lifestyle, change is always difficult, especially with the British public. We are showing people the door to sustainability and hoping that they will enter it, but we can't dictate how people live their lives. But we would, of course, welcome the opportunity to reduce the amount of parking spaces if it helped the development proceed.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Sparks.
Thank you, Chair. I get it. As a homeowner, I have a driveway with 2 spaces. I would love to have an electric car. And my understanding is effectively you're looking at two cars per household. But to me, it's disappointing that you're only considering fitting 1 charge point. And surely, if we're going to move towards electric cars, and we are moving towards electric cars, we need to take the initiative now. And if we're designing houses with spaces for 2 cars, we need to design those houses with the capability of charging 2 cars.
I totally agree with you.
So why is that not in the plan?
I'm not sure. Guys?
Capacity of the national grid at the minute.
There we go.
National grid, it's not.
But your 40 houses will not overload the national grid, and the national grid is building the growth of electric cars into its forecasts. So
We can put 2 charging points in each carport if that helps. Any ideas to make this more sustainable, to get Exeter on the map as a zero carbon city, to work together, we completely welcome, guys. Obviously, this is our first proposal we're putting forward, and any feedback you can give us to work together, we're completely open to that.
Councillor Mitchell.
Just taking up on a point we raised earlier or discussed about financial contributions from your company and still in affordable housing. Would we be right, even, obviously I don't want to discuss commercial numbers with you, but would we be right in thinking that these properties will carry a premium over traditionally built accommodation?
Historically, with the homes that we've built throughout Cornwall, the houses have commanded a slight premium quite organically just through to supply and demand, if I'm honest with you. We've not set out to go, right, we are putting X amount more on our houses. We've gone out and said, right, well, these are the homes, these are how many we've got, and the demand is sort of pushed the prices up slightly. But in terms of our actual, Tom Porter, in terms of our actual pricing,
You're in line with other developers of supporting.
I'm sorry, but you're not supposed to ask other people. You're supposed to answer the questions yourself.
No, what I was saying is the price you're charging for these properties at a premium to traditionally built housing of a lower standard? Are you charging a premium price?
Well,
we're taking into consideration the fact that we have to spend more money on the properties, but we are not pricing people out of the market. These are not second homes. Richard and I set up the company on the basis of providing sustainable living to the masses, not to be a developer that was coming in for the money, if you like. So we're not commanding higher prices because we want to. We're commanding higher prices because the demand says so, if that makes sense.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. You probably realise that you're preaching to the converted in terms of actually building homes to passive house standards, because we're already doing that at the council. And you also, I noted, were very keen to ask us for suggestions as to how you might make this more acceptable. And I think one of the things for a number of us would be to hit that 35% affordable housing contribution. So rather than 6, we're looking for 14. So it's, I think
of
that
course.
would you like to comment on that?
We're open ears. We built a development in Cornwall quite recently, and the council constituents agreed that providing low-cost living to their constituents was more advantageous than a few $100,000 in Section 106 monies, etc. So we're just trying to get the balance. As I said, we're entering Exeter. We've not built anything here yet, so we've not had the pleasure of working with you guys. So we're still understanding. We're still sort of learning. So I'm sure we can go back to the drawing board and have a look and see what we can do. See if there's any sort of room for manoeuvre. I don't have the viability report in front of me to know whether or not it's possible from a numbers point of view. But as I said, we're open to suggestions.
Thank you. If there are no other questions to Mr. Carr, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
We will now open the debate on this one. When Mr. Carr has left the table. Can you press your microphone?
Yes, of course.
For me? Lovely, thank you. Right, who wants to start on this one? Councillor Sheldon.
Okay, made some notes, I'll try and be coherent. Basically, there's going to be £309,000 provided for highways and education from this development. They're not taking a hit, we're taking a hit of over half the affordable housing that we should be getting. I think from the conversation around the table, we were all more than comfortable with the significant reduction in parking spaces on the site, which I feel would therefore enable more properties to be built, which might make it viable to get far closer to that 35% figure. And I would be looking to have that before I can support this application. it's no good saying we get carbon neutral homes for the masses, but the masses don't include people who need an affordable house. So on that basis, I can't support taking less than half the affordable housing provision.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. It will come as no surprise to many of you on this committee that I've done some considerable amount of work around this application, including having a site meeting with Lloyd and the county councillor last week. I was very and am very concerned about traffic, and this is evidenced by the fact that there are community groups springing up in Pinhoe who are looking to forward a neighbourhood plan because they see it as at least one methodology to have a greater impact on traffic congestion. Lloyd very kindly pointed me in the direction of his Pinhoe Framework Access Strategy. I knew it existed and I had been involved with a previous iteration of it. I wasn't aware that it had an updated version. I have some difficulties with it, which I think it's unfair to share with the committee or the general public until such time as I've talked to Lloyd and the highways officers as to how it's being built. But I do have to reiterate the comments made by Mrs. Radford about the cumulative impacts of the developments in East Devon and Pinhoe, which are causing dramatic increases on congestion and difficulty. I fully understand the reasons why the distributor road, the Eastern Fields distributor road cannot be built, but I am somewhat concerned that we do not seem to have a, to my mind, coherent and cogent plan to deal with the increase in traffic from all of these developments, and another 40 homes here will only add to that difficulty. There has been considerable complaint from residents recently, and some of that is due to the fact that temporary roadworks for the construction of a cycleway and for district heating schemes has taken place. So I would disregard those difficulties, but I think there is an intrinsic systemic increase in traffic which is not fully and properly addressed by this transport strategy, and I would be very keen to have further discussions with the Highway Authority as to what we could possibly do to mitigate the transport impacts. One of which, of course, is car-free developments. And I fully recall developers throwing their hands in the air in horror when district heating schemes were proposed at Cranbrook. Now they're all the rage. We have them all over the place. Everybody loves them to bits. This is an opportunity for a company who are clearly dedicated to green issues to make a stand, and actually, given the access to this site is poor and there are only 40 houses on it, to at least make some of these houses or the development in total car free. And I would have loved to have seen that. As far as Councillor Sheldon is saying, clearly if we get rid of some of these car parking spaces, there's space to build some more, which could be affordable housing, which would appease some of our residents even more.
Councillor Morse.
Right. As a local authority, we are taking this sort of the idea of carbon neutrality and we are running with it. And I'm incredibly proud of the efforts we are making. I'm proud that we build passive housing and that we've set up a development company to try and influence what's built in Exeter, so that we get these quality of houses that we're seeing in front of us now. And there is no doubt that there is quality there. I also am a Labour councillor from a Labour local authority with a policy for 35% affordable housing. Now, I'm willing to accept that we can't probably ask for the kind of development we want and the same level of affordable housing, and that there will be give and take in that, and it will depend on each site. And, you know, Devon County Council are asking for a lot of money for education and transport, and, we might not agree with your transport outcomes, but we also know that if we go to appeal, we'll lose if we go against it, so we're a bit stuck with that one. The thing that disturbs me is we are building these houses and we are making compromises with some of our own developments so that there is some viability, but we're taking quite a big loss in profit to do that. And if you can put a man on the moon, maybe we can also not always make as much as we used to build houses, because we do have a responsibility to the environment, but we also have a responsibility to those people who are not able to afford the premium that these houses bring normally, which I think is what Councillor Sheldon was saying. So what I don't want to do is refuse this application, because I think it's a good application. But what I do have concerns about is the amount of car parking, and that the affordable housing element, I accept viability is an issue there, but that it is just so low. It's not even half of what we ask for. So I don't know if anyone would want to support me, and I really don't want us to keep deferring applications all day, because they just come back in front of us and we have to have the same debates over and over again, and we should be able to make decisive decisions. But I kind of like this application. I realise Pinhoe has issues. I live on the route that takes you in from Pinhoe. I know about the traffic increase. I know about all of those issues, but as I said, highways aren't objecting. So if we are going to put that development on this site, and we have to accept that we've already lost that the Green Ridge argument, could we not just look about whether there is a bit more viability, so that we're at least looking at half of what we asked for? And if that is by reducing some of the car parking spaces, then that would be a positive too. So I'd like to propose deferral for those conversations to be had, and I'm sorry, but also think it's really important that we do.
Before I ask for a seconder for that, Councillor Sutton, you wanted to speak.
I'm going to second that, because Councillor Morse has said pretty much what I was going to say.
I think, like all members of this committee, I don't like deferring items, but I think we need to work with these developers. Yes, it is a good scheme. It's good that these houses are going to be carbon neutral, but we do need our affordable housing. Okay, just a minute. So I'll take your suggestion in a minute. When Councillor Sparks has spoken, so I could see a hand but couldn't see whose it was. Councillor Sparks.
Thank you, Chair. We absolutely need carbon zero homes in Exeter, but by imposing upon developers restrictions on car parking, it's simply going to mean that the homes are not going to sell. Yeah, we in previous committees we've looked at, for example, the Clifton Hill site, and we weren't talking about making that a car-free development when that's pretty much in the centre of Exeter. I take on board the bit about the affordable housing, and to me it seems a bit low. I think we need more affordable housing, but we also have to be fair to the developer, and that means, we've got to approve developments that can actually be sold. And I certainly wouldn't buy a house there if I couldn't park my car there. And I used to live in Churchill, just around the corner. Fully on board with what Councillor Harvey was saying earlier about the bus route. There is a bus route, but that's not the be all and end all. Thank you.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to speak to the amendment in support of the amendment. The reason I'm doing that is I believe that the developer themselves opened the door for us. The impression I got from the planning officer was that things were cut and dry and that was it in our report. But the developer did say in their presentation they're open for further discussions on these matters. And I think it's only right that those discussions take place to see if a more equitable distribution between the developer and us and our local residents can take place. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. I will go to the vote then on the deferral, which is on the affordable housing, reduction in car parking spaces, and the suggestion that they do put 2 charging points to each house. Is everybody happy with that? So, and it will come back to this committee. I think it needs to.
It's not. We're having a review.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Right. Those in favour that we defer this item?
10 in favour, Chair.
Those against? 2. So we will defer this item and it will come back to this committee. I don't think we've ever deferred 2 items at one meeting. We now go to item number, whatever it is, Landorf Pennsylvania Road, and I think this is you again, Paul.
Okay. Okay, this is an outline application for up to 26 houses, all matters reserved except for access, which is proposed off Pennsylvania Road on the western side of that red line, halfway between the north and south elements. The site lies to the eastern side of Pennsylvania Lane, beyond the built-up area of Pennsylvania, and located in an area of landscape setting and a site of local interest of nature conservation as designated in the local plan. The site layout is for illustrative purposes only, contains a combination of terrace and semi-detached properties, and as I said before, access, as you see on there, is proposed on Pennsylvania Road. A few photographs just showing the site. You just see at the top where the lamppost is. That's where the site begins. There's a field access into the field beyond. You'll note actually there's no pavement on either side of the road. That's just important to say. There's existing access that will be closed off and planted up along that road frontage, and you will see where the telegraph post is further on. That's probably the location of the proposed access. There's the access roughly where the telephone telegraph mast is. It would mean the visibility display would mean the reduction of all that landscaping, all that existing hedgerow would be removed. Within the site, the site is to the right of the barbed wire fence there. That property you see is located in Whitethorn Park. See the site carries on up to the hedgerow at the top there. So you can see it's a kind of undulating site. You'll see the green area in the centre of the picture with behind the trees. It is the site, so you can see it slopes up beyond the existing properties in Pennsylvania. Okay. The fundamental consideration is the positive benefit of additional houses to meet the council's lack of a 5-year housing supply against the impact the development will have on the landscape character of the area. Members would have received some correspondence from the agents being critical of the officer's report, which is in front of you. The claim is that insufficient weight has been placed on the need for housing within the report. However, members will note that this issue is raised within the report, and indeed in the last sentence states that, whilst the positive benefit of 26 houses, including 35% affordable housing, is recognised, this is not outweighed by the negative impact the development would create. The report explains in detail the importance of this area for landscape, and recent appeal decisions have highlighted the need to be site-specific about the site's area in particular in terms of its landscape value. The landscape officers provided comments which emphasise the landscape area quality. Consequently, in this instance, the protection of the landscape outweighs additional housing provided. Indeed, the agents were made aware some time ago of in principle objection to this proposal during a pre-application discussion, but decided to proceed with the application. It is considered that the agents' criticisms are unfounded. The report highlights the balance between landscape and additional houses and allows members to take their own view in terms of which takes precedent. The officer's advice is clear in this instance, and I do not think that a deferral, as requested by the agent, is warranted in this instance. In addition, 2 additional reasons for refusal are considered justified in respect to the loss of the hedgerow to achieve the necessary visibilities for the access and the impact this would have on the landscape and biodiversity in the area, and also in terms of highway safety issues. No details have been provided that a safe pedestrian access can be achieved to the site. The agents have described an adjacent route throughout the back entrance of the site, but no details have been provided. And as the earlier photographs has highlighted, the access for pedestrians is particularly poor. Consequently, the officer's recommendation is for refusal.
Has anybody got any questions to Paul before I ask the speaker? No. Councillor Begley, if you would like to come to the table when you're comfortable. You weren't here at the beginning of the meeting, so we didn't hear that you can speak for as long as you like, unlike the other members of the public. When you're comfortable.
Thank you very much for that, Chair. I will try and keep it snappy so that I don't delay you more than necessary. So I'm here to represent the views of local residents who I've met with to hear their concerns. Obviously, I'm delighted to hear what the recommendation is by officers. The first concern is safety. Pennsylvania Road, that part of Pennsylvania Road, is already a very dangerous one for pedestrians, cyclists, and indeed motorists. There's no footpath, as has already been pointed out, on either side of the road. There is a speed limit, but it seems that it's very frequently overlooked by drivers that are approaching the city via that road. It seems they don't really notice the speed limit. One of the residents suggested that's because it starts before the area becomes obviously urban, so people don't immediately slow down because they don't sort of see themselves in a particularly built-up area. So that's often ignored, which makes it particularly perilous for cyclists and for people on foot. I think there was a transport consultation, and now the official data from that records one fatality over the recent year. But residents have actually witnessed or seen evidence of many more accidents, but I don't think they reached the official data because there were no sort of serious injuries. So they have some have actually seen these accidents or heard them, but in other cases they had to clear up the debris left behind, broken glass, broken mirrors, and so on. And that's particularly on if you all have sight of the plans. Just on the south of the area, there's a junction between Pennsylvania Road and Whitethorn Park, and that particular junction that's on that corner, on that bend, is where these accidents happen, with people coming down that road way too fast. Yeah. So. Yeah, cover that, sorry. I think that's just about done. I'll come back to cars in a minute. The second issue is environmental. The area is very close to two nearby stables. In fact, the field to the north of the site is a field that's often occupied by horses from the Hilltop stable. There's another set of stables to the northeast of the site. There are concerns that horses, being notoriously sensitive and temperamental beasts, are going to be terribly adversely affected by the building works that are going on. But there's also concerns that if these houses are intended for family occupation, there's also the risk that children inevitably being drawn towards animals might be tempted to feed them and so on. This causes quite a problem actually for horse owners, because as horses graze, they sort out the safe food from the unsafe food. And if they're given clumps of food by people that don't know, they can be given food that actually makes them very ill. And then there's also the food they shouldn't have, which is obviously sugar cubes and the like. So that's an ongoing concern. The nearest bus is the P bus, which stops on Stoke Valley Road, which I think is the nearest stop. It's quite an unsafe walk from this side to there if you go via Pennsylvania Road. And if you go by the other side, I think there was talk of a kind of walking access to here, which takes you along a bridleway and out into private road, so that would have to be negotiated and sorted out. It's a very zigzaggy route to get to the stop. And I think that may just be quite unrealistic, especially in winter and after heavy rain, on a sort of rather muddy pathway. But I think because of the safety issues of the road, it's really going to put people off leaving that site on foot or by bicycle, which I think is in conflict with our targets in terms of controlling our carbon output and so on. Because pedestrians and cyclists are neither encouraged nor enabled by this plan to safely use that road. There will be increased traffic. I think there was a suggestion in the plans that there was likely to be 15 two-way journeys per day. Because of the safety issues, I think that's an underestimate. I think it's likely to be a great deal more. There's concern about supermarket and parcel delivery traffic. Some of the roads around there are very, very narrow. There's already been serious issues of Refford Road being blocked by large vehicles that have been misled by sat navs and things, I suppose. It has caused quite a lot of chaos around there. In terms of sort of general kind of wildlife concerns, deer, foxes, badgers, bats have all been spotted by local residents in that field. There's undoubtedly a multitude of other fauna and flora supported in the area by existing hedgerows and so on. And so there's concerns about the effects upon our biodiversity, if that's taken up. It's not walkable to the shops. The shop on Stoke Valley Road is closed down. There's not really practically any walkable shops. Morrison's quite a hike away, really. So those are other concerns. The third issue of concern, which is related, is the water supply. I'm already told by local residents who border this area that they have no water sometimes. It gets cut off. And the explanation that's been offered by South West Water for this is, well, you live at the top of a hill. So if with increased demand, it's kind of hard to imagine that that's not going to be even more of a problem. Also, if we're going to be paving over areas with roadways and parking spaces, etc., it's going to affect the drainage from the site. I believe there's a plan for a pond for runoff to be collected, which will then be disseminated into existing waterways. Well, apparently already when there's heavy rain, those existing waterways are pretty full to the brim. So there's concern about all that as well. And the final point I'd like to make is in terms of the landscape and the setting and the character of the area. So this is one of our green hills, the wonderful green hills that give Exeter its fantastic character really here. So it's also very close by to a Roman hill station and an Iron Age hill fort, and across the road from the site there's a picnic area in the Bellevue area, which I believe is possibly university property, I'm not sure, but it's a well-used area, and all of those sites will undoubtedly be impacted should this be allowed to go ahead. And I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Begley. Has anybody got any questions? No. Thank you very much, Councillor Begley. We will now open the debate on this one. Who'd like to start? Nobody? Oh, Councillor Guzane.
I'd like to just take your chair. First, I'd like to, as a person who used this road for almost 20 years, commuting from my home to Kirkton, I only used it in the summer because it's actually petrifying, and I totally agree. It's a dangerous road, and it becomes so narrow in some areas that you stop from actually passing. So to have even more traffic on that road, I totally agree. It's just not appropriate.
Does anybody else wish to speak on this one, or should we go to the vote? Right, we'll go to the vote. Can I have a proposer and a seconder that we refuse this application? Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Branston. All those in favour that we refuse this one, please show.
10.
Those in favour that this is allowed. Abstentions? 2. So we have refused that application. Thank you, members. We now go on to Whitton Parton House, and I think that's Howard doing this one.
Yes, there's an application for redevelopment of Whitton Barton House, and there are a couple of updates. So on the update sheet, there are further comments from the Police Anti-Sexual Liaison Officer following the receipt of additional information. There are some verbal updates too. There is a revision to Condition 2, and that's tweaking the plan references in Condition 2. And I won't read through that, but I have provided it to the committee clerk electronically. And lastly, there is a further comment from one of the objectors following up on additional information around trees and landscape planting, and in summary he says that the approach to tree planting still focuses on numerical assessment and loss mitigation as opposed to quality, The design places significant reliance on aftercare and is concerned that that aftercare won't be forthcoming. So the site, if you're familiar with Pinnow Road, these are the shops at Whipton Barton Village and the crossing. So the site is the site between Wren's house, the 11-storey tower, and Whipton Barton. This isn't a conservation area. There's no listed buildings on the site. There are no protected trees on the site. This Whipton Barton Village is designated as a local centre in the local plan. There's a range of services, and there are a number of buses that stop at bus stops immediately outside the site, both on Pinnow Road and on Vaughan Road. So the area of the site is 0.72 hectares, developable area, but it doesn't extend the red line to include pieces of highway. The applicant is proposing works of improvement on the highway to aid people crossing the road, principally. So this is a view from Pinnow Road by the crossing. You can see the shops on the north side of the road and the site. There's the landscaped area on the right. You can see the junction at the distance of Vaughan Road, and this is the junction of Summer Lane. So just turning slightly to right to look in towards the site. These are the buildings in the middle of the site to be demolished. There's 2-storey buildings, and single-storey, and some further single-storey at the back. It was a sheltered accommodation facility, which is now only partially occupied. This is Hill Lane, which you'll see referred to in the committee reports, and that is stopped at its junction with Pinnow Road. So this is looking from further down Pinnow Road. You can see the site. You can see Wren House, referred to 11-storey block at the back of the site. You can see how the site slopes down the topography both towards Pinnow Road, but also towards Vaughan Road, and there are some differences in levels on the site to be accommodated. And this is on Vaughan Road, looking from the end of the site, adjacent Wren House just on the left. Looking back through the site, and you'll see single-storey buildings and 2-storey. And you can see the 2-storey house on Hill Lane on the other side, which was switched to Hill Lane. This is the road running down. You can just see the shops on Pinnow Road in the distance, and this is Mill Lane, which is closed at that end. There are a number of access points to the site, both to the house but also to the existing sheltered accommodation, which should be stopped up as part of the proposal. So the layout of the site is with a number of blocks from the perimeter of the site. Block on the frontage, block A, block B1 and B2 are referred to before, C1 and C2 on this side. So the block on Pinnow Road is proposed as 4 stories, and the block on Vaughan Road again is 4 stories, and these blocks are 3 stories. So it's a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, 91 in total, 33 1-bed and 59 2-bed apartments. It does involve the loss of the existing trees on the site, which you saw in the photographs. There is 1 tree retained, which is a copper beech, retained in that location, and the scheme does include a scheme of replacement landscaping, and there are opportunities, particularly around the perimeter of the site, to plant additional trees, which to replace lost trees. The trees on the site were planted as part of the redevelopment of that sheltered housing scheme permitted in the late 70s. So, external elevations, this is the elevation of Pinnow Road, Block A. This is the elevation when you look in from the courtyard. As you'll see, the flats are orientated, they all have balconies on the ground floor, a ground floor private space looking in towards the centre of the site. And the internal layout showing 2 access points in Block A. It's actually split between 2 parts with 2 sort of front access doors. The bottom of those 2 is the ground floor layout, so you can see the access points from both from Pinnow Road, bin stores associated with the access points, and into the central courtyard. Take through various floor plans, roof plans, similar design scheme across all of the blocks. This is a 4-storey block B1. Again, you can see how flats are orientated to give themselves balconies looking into the communal space, overlooking that. I won't go through all the layouts, they are designed by One Hand, so they have a similarity. These are the 3-storey blocks on Hill Lane, where they are proposing in with 2-storey housing and one rise. The scheme is the landscaping to the centre of the site. So there is a garden area split into 2 parts by an access route directly linking it to Vaughan Road from the crossing next to the shops. And the developer's intention is that these be open to the public, although they are gardens associated with residents. There is a permissive allowance that through natural surveillance and through the control of access points and the feeling of privateness that this will achieve a good quality environment that the residents feel they have ownership of, but people can also feel they can come and use on a permissive basis. In terms of parking, the site has less than half a parking space per dwelling unit. The majority of these are in 2 small car parks. Here and here, both accessed through Vaughan Road, so it takes any vehicular access out of Hill Lane, which is the primary school, junior school further down the lane, so it removes traffic from that lane. There are a small number of on-street parking spaces, and the applicant is proposing that be 5 car club cars parked on street with electric charging points as part of this development. It's one of the measures to ensure that it functions well with a reduced level of on-site parking. Another feature is a set of the sort of hire bikes, the electric hire bikes you see around the city, and there's a set of 10 stands and 5 bicycles being proposed as part of the scheme. Visitor parking for cycles, you see in the scheme, and then resident cycle parking in a couple of different blocks, one here and one here. Provides 118 cycle parking spaces for the 92 units, and incorporates some parking for larger cycles, cargo bikes, that sort of thing. There are, within the scheme, there are 8 sheltered housing units, 8 disabled accessible housing units designed to wheelchair standards, and those are all clustered in this block here. So alongside that, you've got 8 rechargeable scooter stores in which people can park, access the site in here, and then park scooters in and transfer into wheelchairs within those stores for accessing the buildings. And there is a covered area that so you can access the bin stores without going out inclement weather like we've had today. There have been a number of revisions to the design of the landscape area, so some sort of pergolas and covered seating areas have been removed, and the cycle parking in this area and those which have got roofs are clustered on one side of the footpath to make sure there is adequate natural surveillance of the cycle stores. So just to zoom in slightly, there is intended to be permissive access to the garden areas, but defensible space segregating off private ground floor spaces from that. Looking in detail at the bottom of the site, again we've got some defensible space separating private areas there. There have, as I say, been changes since originally submitted, but that's a bird's eye view to give you an overall impression of the scheme. In terms of viability and affordable housing, we've touched on that already on other schemes. The viability appraisal that has been done and we've had analysed separately, and it was actually Plymouth City Council that did it for us in this case, concluded that there wasn't the ability to provide affordable housing as part of the scheme. So from a planning point of view, it is 100% market housing. The applicant has the intention of providing 60 of the units to the City Council as affordable housing, but in terms of planning control and where the planning is assessed is. Principally because of the low sales value of flats in this area, the scheme could not deliver affordable housing if it was down to the mechanisms that we have through planning. As I say, that's due to the low sales value of flats, the fact that it is designed to passive house standards. The cost of doing that didn't materially impact on the viability. So that's where we stand with viability. There are other contributions being requested, and the viability assessment is clear that the scheme cannot carry those. with the exception we take of the transport requests, in that these are relatively minor, but we do feel they're important to make it a successful scheme with a low level of parking on site. So they are around bus passes and use of the cycle hire scheme, and they are very much less substantial requests. So in summary, the CGI, looking back from the scheme, back from the point where we looked at from the initial street view and the photograph, we support in principle. It's a very sustainable location. We talked about access, we talked about bus routes, but there's also 800 metres from a railway station and close to local amenities. Makes much better use of the site than it currently does. The loss of the trees is regrettable, but there is a replacement landscaping scheme that does include a number of heritage, large specimen trees. We have the retained beech tree on this corner of the site. We welcome the standards of build, which do go in advance of our planning policies in terms of energy reduction and performance in terms of air tightness and so on. We very much welcome the going further than the policy requirements in terms of disabled accessible dwellings. In terms of viability, we run through the reasons why through planning we won't be securing any affordable housing or cannot on this site. There are a number of matters of detail we've picked up from the police architectural liaison comments, and in terms of landscape, that we've suggested conditions to be attached so that we can continue to work on those. Plenty around the design of entrances and bin stores and Pinot Road frontage, around making sure we get the design of the landscaping scheme and any means of enclosure right. But on that basis, we recommend approval subject to the conditions and 106 matters listed in the report.
Thank you, Howard. Has anybody got any questions to Howard before I ask? Councillor Mitchell.
One point. Am I right in thinking that the property on the frontage of the main road is 1 story higher than the development behind it? And have you got a visualisation of how this development sits with the properties across the road?
Across the road?
Where the shops are, yes. Yeah. What the visual line is across there. It doesn't quite take that in, but if you go back to the photograph, you see they are 3 stories. So that's the same scene. You've got a 3-story with rooms in the roof.
Just when I looked at the last picture you put up before you changed, it looked like there were 4 stories, not 3 on the frontage. There were 4
the development, yes. So yes, it is a 4-story block on the frontage here.
Compared to 3-story across the road?
Across the road, yeah.
Whereas everything behind the 4-story is 3-story?
No, on Mill Lane there's 3-story. On Bourne Road, which you can see through the other side, it's 4-story on Bourne Road as well.
Any other points? Councillor Morse.
Just because it would be hypocritical given some of the decisions we made tonight. When you say about the 60 affordable units possibly coming forward but not through the planning, how, why, what, where, when?
That is the developer's proposal, and you'll hear from the developer in a moment. That is as opposed to affordable housing that we secure via planning policy, and we're quite clear that on the basis of the viability. If the developer wasn't proposing that, we wouldn't be able to secure any affordable housing through planning. If another developer was proposing a market scheme exactly the same, we would say we couldn't afford any affordable housing. It's not because of the build standards. In this case, it's due to the location and the low sales value of flats in this location.
If there are no other questions, would Mr. Dave Tarbett like to come forward, please, as an objector? And you also have 3 minutes, Mr. Tarbett, when you're comfortable. If you press the button on the right-hand side of the microphone.
Good evening, members. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm a director at the Royal Devon and Exeter Hospital, and the reason I'm here today is that the RD&E has made a Section 106 claim to the value of around £118,000 for the development. The council officers have rejected our claim and haven't put that forward to you on the basis of two reasons. Firstly, that there was no justification for the claim, and secondly, that there's insufficient information. I'm not aware of the information that you have received, so I wanted to present today over the 3-minute period. Just to go on to the justification, we've provided in some considerable detail in writing our legal opinion that we've received, that under the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990, health is a material consideration in housing, and that from a policy perspective, healthy communities, if denied under Section 106, would be in breach of the the NPPF. We've also provided other documentation, including legal appeals. This correspondence started last February between the Hospital Trust and the Council. We have had a reply from the Council back in July, and we then went back with detailed legal points back in December. We've not had a reply to that, but we have had a series of meetings at management level and at executive level between the hospital and the council, which we're very grateful for, and we think progress has been made on that front, which is good. But housing and population does have an impact on health. 1,000 houses would require £1 million of NHS spend to deliver our secondary care services. That's because there's a 12 to 18 months delay in the funding that we receive from our commissioners from when housing is built, and it's that gap of funding that is not available. The Section 106 payment is the mitigation. It is produced reasonably and fairly and related to the scale and the kind of the development, and failure to mitigate would result in lower care. To come back to the point on sufficient information, the information that we provide on each of these applications, referred to Appendix 5 of our claim, has 8 activity types in a financial model that is detailed, that is audited, is provided on a transparent basis and on an open book basis. So we believe we have provided quite detailed consideration for everything from A&E attendances through to outpatient clinics, through to day case procedures and elective care procedures. And so it's the cumulative effect of housing. If we put 50,000 houses across Devon and wider Exeter, that's £50 million that would not be spent on NHS services. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions? Councillor Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Chairman, I was just going to ask Mr. Talbot what reasons were given. You said reasons were. Can you explain yourself, please?
The reasons for denying the claim. It's that we did not have a legal basis, so the justification wasn't put forward. But we provided quite detailed explanations as to our legal position. And the second one was insufficient information, essentially. But we've provided a very detailed auditable model that's used across the country, in fact, in other NHS local government discussions around funding and the NHS. So it's a UK-based financial model. NHS services are looked at in a very discrete way. All of the services, from the use of drugs to doctors to nurses to facilities, across all of the activities that a patient would receive. So we've used that information to produce our financial claim. Thank you.
Councillor Fold.
Thank you, Chair. I think perhaps the truth.
Oh, it's
Too
many.
Trying, testing. Yeah. Hey, very well. I think it might be true to say that we're all operating with cakes that are much smaller to cut up these days. Now, my understanding is that there has been a precedent for supporting the NHS Trust, and that's based on the last core strategy from 2012, and the council has made available in the region of £80,000 over that 8-year period. It seems to be quite a jump to be asking for 118,621 to cover just the first year of occupation. Now, my other understanding is that £80,000 has been passed over by the council to support the start-up of new GP practices. Now, when I start reading your list of accident and emergency attendances, non-elective admissions, short stays, elective admissions, outpatient appointment procedures, and community nursing visits, that seems to go a little bit beyond the remit of helping set up new GP practices. So I'd perhaps argue that there isn't a precedent for this level of funding within just 1 year. And if a precedent were to be set, it should be set within the context of whatever the latest core strategy is, or indeed the ongoing discussions at the moment between the various authorities within GESP.
Yeah, so I think there's 2 points you're making there. The first one is about funding for GPs, and obviously that primary care funding is absolutely about GPs. So I'm not representing primary care, I'm representing the secondary care services of the NHS, so acute hospital, community services, so quite separate from primary care. So no funding in Exeter has gone to secondary care, so you're absolutely right. In terms of a precedent, well, I think the point we're making is that we have a legal claim. We have a legal claim under the planning law that health is a material consideration and that healthy communities need to be considered under policy frameworks like the MPPPF. So it's, in that sense, it's not so much a precedent, it's about the statute, it's about the law.
Councillor Morse.
My question is when you decided this needed to be done, because I sat previously in my role as a county councillor on the Health and Wellbeing Board of Devon County Council, where we frequently discussed the inability of planning to sort of support the health services, and nobody really wanted to engage with it at the time. We seem to have got to this point where I imagine there's been a lot of development, and I imagine it is having a hell of an impact on health, and I'm not disputing that at all. But my concern is that we're maybe making unreasonable now demands on the developments that are starting to come forward, and from when you've decided to start doing this, that fills a gap where other developers have got away with it. And I think that kind of puts everybody in a really awkward position. So I just kind of want to know the timings and the explanations for it so that I can get that straight in my head, given previous roles I've held. It doesn't sit quite right.
I think you're right that the NHS has not understood planning, housing, and it is only recently across the country that the NHS has considered, because of the growth of housing in the country, the impact it's having on services. So I think you're right. It's been late to the party, effectively. So in the secondary care piece, but that's not to say that the claims aren't legitimate, of course, and that you know under planning law that there's that illegitimacy. I mean, in terms of the money, I think the numbers can look big, but of course it's about £1,000 a dwelling. So in one sense, when you think about it in that context, it isn't particularly large. But you know, it is the cumulative effect for us that would be so significant. I mean, the RD&E's accident and emergency wait times are already weak, and we're adding population growth where for 12 to 18 months we'll be short of funding, so it will get worse. There's no doubt about that, because you can't put 50,000 houses in and take £50 million out of the system and expect the performance to either improve or even stay static. I mean, that's the material point I suppose we're making. But it isn't just about A&E. Obviously, it's about the flow of patients through hospital, preventing bed blocking, making sure that we've got access to day case procedures, all of the things that you've commented on, that you've seen in the paperwork. It's a very big issue across the whole of the country, and you know, for us in the RD&E, it's very material to us.
Councillor Mitchell.
Point of information, could you inform us what your relationship is with other local authorities that feed into the RD&E and what contributions they are making?
Yeah, so we're having the same conversations with all of the local authorities that refer, effectively where the areas refer patients into the RD&E. So we have very good data around where patients are referred into our elected care services, so they come from GPs. So we're having conversations with Teambridge, East Devon, Mid Devon. All of those conversations have taken place in the last 12 months. And it's fair to say that I think because it's new, many of the other councils are looking to Exeter City Council to, and not so much make a precedent, but to establish the legal position. Although, of course, there are other hospitals having the same claim. So Torbay Hospital, for example, will claim on housing in Teambridge. So there's a sort of it's not a double claim.
Excuse me, I think it's beginning to become a debate.
Right.
So I know that Howard wants to come in. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up the point the councillors. No, I was just providing some clarification, the Chair. As members have said, we empathise with the position of the NHS in terms of funding, and that healthcare is capable of being a material consideration in terms of planning. And, as we said, that needs a very robust evidence base. It also should be an evidence base that is tested properly at local planning examination against other considerations and the development coming forward. Give the opportunity for that examination in public and for developers and others, members of the public, to make their points of view heard, and to the planning inspector to consider that in determining whether the plan is, as made with its complete suite of policies, is viable. So there isn't that those representations weren't made at the time the core strategy was put together and adopted in 2012, and there is a policy hook that allows for GPs provision in some areas, and we have seen contributions taken and land safeguarded for the purposes of GP surgeries. But that isn't the case in terms of secondary healthcare, and therefore the policy does not have that provision in it. So the position is that we don't feel it meets the tests of the NPPF and the circular on Section 106 contributions as we currently stand. That position has been the basis of previous decisions, and that's been upheld recently by a planning inspector appeal at Walnut Gardens. So at the moment, the position that our response is as written in the committee report, but we would encourage the NHS to keep working with us in this matter, and especially in terms of the plan making for the future and the GESP and the evidence base and supporting us examination with evidence to put to an inspector and the development industry to say that contributions should be forthcoming in future.
Thank you, Howard. I think this is a debate that we need to have outside of this committee sometime in the near future. Thank you for your contribution, Mr. Tarbert.
Okay,
I think you've sort of made us aware of some of the problems, and I think this is a debate we will have outside of this committee. Thank you very much for coming. I now have Mr. Childs, who has been sitting patiently waiting in support of this application. And I believe you came from Bristol. Did you have any problems?
No, not really. It's a bit blowy.
I know we were concerned that you wouldn't get here.
I was actually asked if I still intended to come because it was so unpleasant, but it wasn't a problem. So, thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm going to be very brief, actually. It's getting late. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with Exeter City Living on the design of this development. It's always inspiring to work with a client with such high ambitions, and the ambition for this project could not be higher. Our brief was to design a housing scheme that will set new standards for public housing in Exeter and in the region. And I know it's built on a lot of good work that's previously gone on, but this is probably the largest so far, I think, of its type. It'll be one of the most sustainable developments in the country outside London. You've talked about passive house, using passive house principles of construction, energy management, and high levels of insulation. These homes will be so efficient that a flat here will cost less than £200 a year to run. And that's a really important factor, I think, in developing this kind of residential development. But the overriding ambition is to create a community here, which will become part of Whipton Village. The apartments are collected around a community garden, which will be accessible to everyone. Howard touched on that. The whole of the landscape has been designed in detail at an early stage to promote wildlife, biodiversity. We've designed in fruit trees and vegetable gardens for everyone to enjoy and to harvest. It's also about creating an inclusive neighbourhood that promotes social interaction. And we've thought long and hard over every detail of the layout of this site. And if, when we're finished, neighbours don't know each other, then we'll certainly have failed. It'll be managed as a mix of tenures, but 10-year blind, except for the 8 adapted flats, designed for accessibility with more generous circulation, and the 8 covered bays for the electric buggies. The scheme was submitted a few months ago to the Southwest Design Review Panel, who in their letter back to me described it as exemplary in its conception and design, so we couldn't do better than that. And our ambitions as architects is to be part of building a community and to create really high quality spaces and places for people to live. It's an extraordinary project, which I hope will receive everyone's support.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. Anybody got any questions or clarification to Mr. Charles? Councillor Moore.
Just because the officer implied that I should ask it instead. With the affordable housing element, which is not being planned into it, can you explain how that might work so that it maybe puts the committee's mind a little more at rest?
Okay, from a lay point of view, rather than a legal or financial one, my understanding is that of the 92, 60 will be affordable homes. The reason for this is funding, in that to get the additional funding from, I think, Homes England, it has to be proved to be unviable to produce them any other way. So the scheme has been presented, and Howard can stop me if I start talking rubbish, but basically to other funding bodies who will say that if 60 of these can be delivered as affordable homes, then they will make up the difference in cost, which allows us to spend basically 100% of the budget on the quality of the construction, the quality of the landscape, the electric cars, the amount of bicycle storage, all of the things that we want to do, which are then not constrained by the viability argument. So it's actually a very clever piece of manoeuvring, I think, within the current system. And we spent the last 3 months talking to the HRA about the management of each flat, what the implications might be, how they'll be organised, whether or not there'll be any on-site management, how the landscape, which is quite complex, will be managed in the future, and all those things.
Are there any other points of clarification? No. Thank you very much, Mr. Childs. Right. Councillor Sutton.
Thank you. I suspect I might be going to say some of the same things as Councillor Moore, so thank you for letting me get in first on this one. I want to speak in support of this application, which I will be voting in favour of. We are, as a committee, often accused of ignoring local Exeter people and Exeter residents and not building accommodation or giving approval to accommodation for them. And this is a textbook example of where we are doing absolutely that. This is a site that at the moment you can hardly say that the existing buildings on that site are attractive or contributing positively to the landscape, but it certainly isn't very good use of a considerable amount of land. I think those bungalows, when they were built, probably at their time were probably fit for purpose, but in no way could you say that they are now. I think it's a very imaginative application. I think in terms of height, it reflects well. Not only are the shops the opposite side of the road kind of similar in height, they're actually a fair distance away as well. And also this is next to Wren's house, which is the tallest residential block in the city. I think I'm right in saying, at least for the time being. So it has a lot going for it. I also welcome the imaginative approach to the delivery of affordable housing, and I thank you very much, Mr. Chance, for that explanation, because it certainly helped me get my head around what we're trying to achieve now. So effectively, if my arithmetic is correct, if this approach is successful, and we've no reason to suppose it won't be, we're going to get something like 66% of the development will be affordable housing. And finally, to move on to the NHS, and I'm sorry that Mr. Tarver's left, although he's probably had a long day. I'm not going to be critical of the NHS and the RD&E in particular. I have many reasons to be very grateful to them. It's only fair to point out that they are if not as strapped for cash, more strapped for cash than local authorities are, and desperately need more funding at every possible level, from GP surgeries right the way through to our hospitals like the great RD&E. But I think we should be pointing out that these are being designed as healthy homes. The whole thing about Passive House is not just about energy efficiency and reduction of carbon. It's actually about designing homes that actually enable people to live healthier, longer lives. So you are taking out the chemicals, you're taking out the carpets, which will harbour all sorts of nasties, and replacing them with hard surface floors. So it is to be hoped, and there is evidence to suggest that the people living in these properties will have fewer health problems in the long term, and I'm sure that is an objective. I'm going to stop there, but I will be supporting this. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Morse.
Doing that again. Speaking as a local member and a not far away resident of the area, I wholeheartedly support this application. I think a lot of the arguments have been made by Councillor Sutton, so I don't want to go over it all over again. What I would particularly like to commend was we had a very extensive consultation process on this, which I and many residents turned up to. Many suggestions were made. I am genuinely buoyed by the amount of them that were taken into account, and things that changed as a result. And I think sometimes people have consultations. We're often invited to them as developers, and they're not really consultations, they're opportunities to be told what you're going to get, whether you want it or not. So I am very glad that local residents' concerns have been taken into account on the whole. I think the local residents are concerned about parking, and I think I can accept that they have a right to be slightly concerned about that. I also think, given some of the conversations we've had today, as a local authority, at some point we have to put our money where our mouth is, and we've got to say we have to reduce car ownership. And I'm one of those people that when you get me out of your car, we've probably won. But we have to accept we cannot continue to plan with the idea that we have more cars and more cars and more cars. So I think this application is good. I think it's healthy. I think it will rejuvenate a bit of the city that needs a bit of love and attention, without gentrifying it, because that terrifies me, because I love where I live for what it is. But I would like to see it just have a bit of investment. And with regards to the issue that's been raised by the RD&E, I completely agree with what a wonderful place it is at the moment. Believe me, they've been wonderful to my family recently. That this appears to be bigger than one application, and definitely bigger than one planning committee can make a decision on in this room at this time. So I think we have to overlook that, allow those conversations to continue, and hopefully we can come to some sort of solution. But I welcome the affordable housing, and I welcome a very well-designed piece in my community.
Councillor Guzane.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask a clarification from Howard. Is that green I see there, is that a vertical garden, or a these two green things that on the side, are they vertical gardens?
Yes, and it's a living wall. Sometimes called a living wall.
Yeah, living wall, yes, yeah, absolutely. That is absolutely, you sold me on this development, that's it. Because that's how we should have it.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Just to add to Councillor Gusane's comment there, that will be very helpful in health terms in actually cleaning up the nitrogen dioxide and those sorts of things emitted from the cars. So it's good news. As councillor in this ward, I really welcome and support this development. I think having 60 affordable homes is fantastic news. And I think another thing to point out is that this is going to provide homes for those families that are already maybe you've got families sharing, so we're not necessarily adding lots of extra people to the RD&E's hospital list. A lot of them will already be patients or have the facility to actually go there. So I think that we shouldn't be too concerned about that at the moment. We'll have those discussions elsewhere. So I think this is a really great development, and I'm certainly going to be supporting it.
Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please, that we approve this one? Take your choice, Howard. Councillor Morse, Councillor Harvey. Right, all those in favour of this one, please show.
Nine in favour, Chair.
Any against? Abstentions? One against, one abstention. Thank you, that one is carried. Item number 9 is decisions made and withdrawn application. Howard, anybody said anything to you?
No comments, Chair.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
That's
sorry.
okay. No, I was just going to say that both for that item and the appeals report, the reports are before members. If there are any questions, if members let us have them now or later, we can arrange for responses.
No questions? I'm sorry about that.
That's all right, don't worry.
Yeah. Site inspection. The items numbers 9 and 10. Number 9 is the list of decisions. Number 10 is the appeals report. Okay. Site inspection party on the 3rd of March is Councillors Harvey, Guzet and Mrs Henson. Thank you members very much. Next meeting is the 16th of March. See you then. Thank you.